Have you ever heard of Chernobyl disaster? Today, I want to take you back to a spring night in 1986. That night began like any other night, but it ended in a way that changed the world forever. Let me introduce to a place called Pripyat. It was a young city in northern Ukraine. The city was built for the workers of Chernobyl nuclear power plant. 30,000 people called the city their home. Pripyat was a proud city. It had schools, it had parks, it had a hospital, it had a cultural center. And right in the middle of its amusement park stood a brand new Ferris wheel. That Ferris wheel was still waiting for its first ride. The first ride was scheduled for the upcoming May Day celebration. So, on the night of April 25, 1986, the city was asleep. The streets were quiet. The Ferris wheel stood still under the stars. Inside the power plant, a team of engineers was working late. They were conducting a routine safety test. There was nothing out of the ordinary. It was just another night at work. At 1:23 a.m. on April 26, someone in the control room pressed a button, and in that instant, everything changed. A massive explosion tore through reactor number 4. The reactor had a concrete lid that weighed 1,000 tons. That enormous lid was blasted into the air like a bottle cap. Radioactive material shot high into the night sky. The Ferris wheel in Pripyat never did get its first ride. To fully understand what went wrong that night, we need to understand how a nuclear power plant operates. And I assure you, the concept is simpler than it might seem. A nuclear power plant does one thing at its core: it generates heat to boil water. When water boils, it creates steam. That steam spins a turbine. The spinning turbine then produces electricity. The heat comes from a process called nuclear fission. In this process, atoms of uranium 235 are split apart. When they split, they release enormous amounts of energy. The second component is the controllers. These are made of boron carbide. The controllers absorb neutrons and slow down the reaction. You can think of them as brakes. The third component is the moderator. The moderator speeds up the reaction. You can think of them as the accelerator. Now let me use a simple analogy. The moderator is the accelerator, the controllers are the brakes. A stable reactor is one where the accelerator and brakes work in perfect harmony. The reactor at Chernobyl was known as the RBMK reactor. The reactor was unique, but it wasn't unique in a good way. It contained two critical design flaws. These flaws made it inherently unstable. Let me explain the first flaw. The accelerator was misplaced. In most modern nuclear reactors, water serves as both the coolant and the moderator. This creates a negative feedback loop. If water turns into steam, the reaction automatically slows down. This is a built in safety mechanism. But in the RBMK reactor, graphite served as the moderator. Water functioned only as the coolant. This created a positive feedback loop. When water turned into steam, the reaction actually accelerated. More steam meant more reaction meant more steam. It was a self reinforcing cycle of instability. Now, let me explain the second flaw. The brakes had accelerator tips. This is perhaps the most troubling flaw of all. Each control rod was tipped with graphite. Graphite is the same material that accelerates the reaction. So, what happened when an operator inserted a control rod to slow down the reaction? The graphite tip initially increased the reaction for a few seconds. Only after those few seconds did the boron section take effect and slow things down. Imagine pressing the brake pedal in your car, but instead of slowing down, the vehicle lurches forward before finally slowing down. That was the reality of the RBMK reactor. On April 25, the engineers began a safety test, but due to various delays, the test was postponed to April 26. During the test, they needed to reduce the reactor power output. They successfully lowered it from 1600 megawatts to 700 megawatts, and then they lowered it to 200 megawatts. But then something unexpected occurred. The power continued to drop. It dropped all the way down to 30 megawatts. What caused this unexpected decline? The answer lies in a byproduct called xenon 135. When uranium undergoes fission, it produces various byproducts. One of these byproducts is xenon 135. Xenon 135 has a remarkable ability. It absorbs neutrons. Neutrons are essential for sustaining the chain reaction. When xenon 135 absorbs them, the reaction slows down. The power drops. In simple terms, xenon 135 was acting as an unintended brake. It was stealing the very particles needed to keep the reaction alive. The engineers now faced a dilemma. The reactor was operating at a dangerously low power level, and xenon 135 was preventing it from rising. This is where human error entered the story. The deputy chief engineer was a man named Anatoly Dyatlov. He was growing impatient. The test had already been delayed. He wanted it completed without further postponement. He made a decision that would prove catastrophic. He ordered his team to withdraw the control rods. He ordered them to take out the brakes. Under normal conditions, the reactor contained 211 control rods. Dyatlov's team pulled them out one by one. By the time they finished, only 8 control rods remained inside the reactor. Let me emphasize that only 8 control rods out of 211 were left inside. The safety regulations were very clear. The operating manual explicitly stated that under no circumstances shall fewer than 15 control rods be present in the reactor. That rule was violated. The reactor now operated without adequate break-in capacity. With most of the control rods removed, xenon 135 began to burn off. The power started climbing. It climbed to 200 megawatts, then to 700, and then to 1600 megawatts, then to 33,000 megawatts. The water in the reactor core began turning into steam at an accelerating rate. And remember the first design flaw? In this reactor, the steam did not slow down the reaction, it accelerated the reaction. A positive feedback loop was now in full effect. The reaction was spiraling out of control. There was no mechanism to stop it. The operators recognized the danger. They initiated an emergency shutdown. They pressed the button that would insert all the control rods into the reactor. But here, the second design flaw revealed its devastating consequences. As the control rods descended, their graphite tips entered the core first. For those crucial first seconds, they did not slow the reaction, they accelerated it. In a matter of 6 to 8 seconds, the reactor's power output surged to an unimaginable 33,000 megawatts. That was more than 10 times its maximum designed capacity. Then came the explosion. The 1,000-ton concrete lid of the reactor was thrown into the air. A second explosion followed. The graphite moderator caught fire. That fire burned for 10 days. The first to arrive at the scene were firefighters. They responded with courage. They rushed toward the blaze without any hesitation. But they had no specialized protective equipment. They had no knowledge of the lethal radiation that surrounded them. They walked on fragments of burning graphite. They kicked the fragments aside with their boots. They didn't know that each piece of graphite was delivering a fatal dose of radiation. Within weeks, 28 of these firefighters had lost their lives. Two plant workers died instantly. in the initial explosion. Now, I want to share with you one of the most remarkable chapters of this story. This is a chapter that deserves to be known by everyone. After the explosion, a new threat emerged. Beneath the reactor lay a tank filled with radioactive water. If the molten nuclear fuel came with contact with that water, it would trigger a third explosion. The consequences of such an event would have been catastrophic. Experts estimate that it could have claimed millions of lives. The entire European continent would have become uninhabitable for 5 lakh years. To prevent this, someone had to go down into that flooded chamber. Someone had to dive into the darkness. Someone had to locate the valves and drain the water. This was a mission with very little chance of survival. Three men stepped forward. Their names were Alexei Ananenko, Valery Bestalov, and Boris Baranov. They put on wetsuits, they carried a single lamp, and they went down into the darkness. They swam through water that was so radioactive and it was like swimming in poison. They were guided only by their memory of the plant's layout and the faint beam of their lamp. They found the valves, they opened the valves, they drenched the water, they stopped the third explosion from happening. Now, here's what many people do not know. They didn't die immediately. They lived, they returned home. They carried on with their lives. But the radiation they absorbed that night never left them. Hope is a good thing. Maybe it's the best of things. And no good thing ever dies. The hope that these three men gave to the world did not die. It still lives in the hearts of those who know their story. These three individuals are heroes in every sense of the word. In the days following the disaster, the Soviet government tried to suppress information about what had occurred. It was the height of the Cold War. Admitting such a failure was politically unacceptable. Swedish monitoring stations detected unusually high levels of radiation. The radioactive cloud had drifted across Europe. It left its invisible signature thousands of kilometers away from the source. On April 28, 1986, newspapers around the world carried dramatic headlines. One headline said, Many, many hundreds are dead. Under mounting international pressure, the Soviet Union was forced to acknowledge the disaster. By May 2, a 30-kilometer exclusion zone was established around the Chernobyl plant. To this day, that zone remains largely uninhabited. Pripyat stands as a ghost city. It is a reminder of what was lost. In the months following the disaster, workers built a massive structure around the ruined reactor. They called it the sarcophagus. The word sarcophagus originally means a stone coffin, and that's exactly what this structure was. It was a concrete and steel coffin built to trap the radioactive remains inside. It was built in just 206 days. Thousands of workers worked hard day and night. These workers were called liquidators. They were exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. Many of them paid for this work with their health, some paid with their lives. But the sarcophagus was never meant to be permanent. It was a temporary solution. Over time, cracks appeared in the structure. When water started seeping in, there was a real risk that the structure could collapse. So, a new plan was made. It was called the New Safe Confinement. This was not just a patch of job, it was a massive engineering project. The numbers are astonishing. It took 9 years to build. It cost $3 billion. It is so large that you could fit the Statue of Liberty inside it. It is designed to last for 100 years. In 2019, this new structure was carefully slid over the old sarcophagus. Now the radioactive remains of reactor number 4 are safely contained. Today, Pripyat remains frozen in time. There are schools with textbooks still on the desks. There is an amusement park with a Ferris wheel that never turned. This is a city that once held 30,000 dreams. Now it is silent.